Welcome to the Westminster Effects Doxology podcast, where we exist for the glory of God and the tone of his people. I'm Cody Fields. Go buy stuff for your guitar at westminstereffects.com and join the discussion at the Westminster Effects Doxology Podcast Lounge. It's too many syllables. I got to fix that. On Facebook. We are still at the Fight, Laugh, Feast conference, and I am joined by one Dr. James White. Dr. White, welcome to the Doxology podcast.
It's good to be with you. The only reason I'm here is because Seth Morrison knows me.
That is literally the only, yeah. So let's just jump into that. You provided the artwork for my flagship pedal.
Oh, cool.
Or at least the background of it.
Right.
So that is Revelation 1:6. I get asked all the time, what does 27:16 mean? And 27 being the 27th book of the New Testament, 1:6. I actually got that from the security code of the church I grew up in.
Oh.
I grew up in the Church of Christ.
Oh, okay.
And so the security code was 5238 for Acts 2:38 because that's the only verse they know.
That's about the only one, yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about Codex Sinaiticus and just maybe even a little bit about how reliable of a record we have in the text.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because, Seth contacted me and he's like, we're doing a album, Dominions, the primary song and stuff like that. And what can you tell me about the term and stuff like that? And I said, well, obviously it's used in the New Testament and it's used here in the book of Revelation. Now, what's interesting is of all the books in the New Testament, the one that we have the fewest manuscripts of is the book of Revelation.
Right.
And the reason for that is it fought for inclusion in the canon.
Right.
Which is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. It's good that the early church wasn't running around going, we need more books with 10-headed monsters and stuff like that. There was a lot of questions about, was John really involved with this? Is this the John the Apostle? It is very unique in the New Testament in its nature and things like that. And so we have the fewest manuscripts, the fewest early manuscripts. And so when you get to Codex Sinaiticus, which is dated between 325 and 350 AD, and what happened was the peace of the church happens in 313. That's when the persecution stops. And so after that, you can have professional scribes copying the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And, like Codex Sinaiticus would have been an extremely expensive thing to have produced because it was the Greek Old Testament and the Greek New Testament. So it's many thousands of pages. Average Christian could never afford something like that.
Right.
So we have these great unsealed texts or majuscule. They're all written in capital letters, texts that were produced in the middle of the 4th century. And Sinaiticus is probably the first, I would imagine, is the first pretty much complete a copy of the book of Revelation. We only have 2 papyri that predate it, and they're very fragmentary. In other words, they've been damaged over time. And when I give a presentation that I have for years on the reliability of the New Testament, I'll show a page from P115, which is of Revelation, and there's just pieces of it sitting there. And I'll go, look, for all of you who are going, man, those papyri don't look like they're in very good shape. I always go, what are you going to look like in 1800 years?
Right.
When you're just a piece of paper, for crying out loud, if you've made it 1800 years, you've done pretty well.
Right. Speaking of the papyri, this is the naming and artwork of this was also partially inspired by you.
Right.
So this is the exegete with papyri in the background.
Oh, yes.
I do know that those Greek letters do not spell out exegete, but we're going more for the...
and that's...
If I remember correctly, it was P45?
P45, yeah, it's P45 from John chapter 10.
Yep.
Which is right there.
Yes.
On my arm. So that's the same section on my arm as part of the sleeve.
I officially have someone who has more ink on his arm on this podcast than me.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
That's a high honor,
I do.
right?
Yeah. There you go. And P45 is interesting because P45 is the only manuscript we know of from history that contained Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts. Now, you would think that would be sort of natural, you got to realize even our order of books, like when you said 2716,
Right.
was Revelation the last book written? Might have been. We don't know.
Right.
And there are other orders of the canon in the ancient church. And the vast majority of gospel manuscripts, when they put Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John together, poor Acts, it just got kicked out of the. It's just lonely over there in the corner. It really is. But P45 around 220 is the date on that. Included the Book of Acts, and I was doing doctoral work on that subject in South Africa when my doctorvater during COVID had a massive heart attack, almost died, and had to retire. And so I wasn't able to finish that stuff down there. I wanted to do it under him because he had gotten his PhD under Bruce Metzger at Princeton. So that was why I was pursuing that. But anyways, P45 is really interesting, and it's cool I had not seen that, but I'd seen the other one, but I hadn't seen the exegete.
There's a lot of nerdiness over here.
There is, my goodness.
So, for one, I know this won't mean anything to you, but the Ibanez Tube Screamer is the most popular overdrive pedal. And it's kind of tradition for every guitar pedal builder to take that core and modify it.
Okay.
So the joke is the 1689 takes something great and it makes it better. Every time I tell a Presbyterian that, they roll their eyes.
They roll their eyes,
And it's, Westminster Effects sounds better than Second London Baptist Effects.
Oh, man, it does. There's no two ways about it.
We also have, and he knows about this, we have the Osteen Distortion. With dollar signs. So.
And you didn't get sued over this?
No. I have gotten cease and desist letters from Chick-fil-A for the original art of the Chick delay. But they gave me free food with that cease and desist. But okay, so
I had no idea.
Yeah. So you've been.
I was starting to wondering if maybe Seth was the source of your weirdness, but no, actually, it's going the other direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's more that I found a kindred weird spirit in Seth.
Yes, that's true.
When that fell in my lap, and that's a great story. I'll tell you about that after we're done recording because the listeners have heard that. That's the second time a Frisbee's flown through here while I've been recording. So you never know what you're getting into here.
Yes.
So, all right. So there's been a lot going on in the Twitter X world in terms of controversies.
I just realized you have a textual variant on your shirt.
Well, that's your fault.
Well, it may be, but have you ever noticed right up here?
Yeah.
Someone forgot a pronoun and stuck it into the margin.
Oh, wow.
And that's why it's in smaller print outside the margin of the normal copying. That? So, because think about it, this is not papyri. This is written on vellum.
Right.
And so it's animal skin. It's not cheap.
You don't have erasers.
You don't have erasers. And the amazing thing is that they could slice. Even in the ancient world, they could slice it that thin.
Yeah.
Paper thin like that is truly amazing. But it was, what would happen is they would it depended on it. Most manuscripts were copied by sight. So you'd have a scribe sitting there and he'd have what's called his exemplar, the original, and he would copy by sight. But sometimes you had some places where it was done, someone's reading and you're copying down what's being read to you. You could get a whole lot more copies done that way.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, you'd have someone come through and they'd proofread it. And so very frequently, what would happen is something like that, they'd catch where they had missed like a pronoun or something like that.
And they just tack it on.
And they just in a smaller, it's the same font style. And when you think about it, that was handwritten.
Right.
When you compare the papyri with the beauty of Sinaiticus, it is just, when people look at it, they just gasp that was actually handwritten.
Yeah.
And there are entire books, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, that go into the 4 different scribes that were used to create Sinaiticus. Because they can tell just by the small little differences in the writing of the alphas and things like that, like right here, Hamas, us, they can tell which scribe was the one who did that particular writing.
Wow.
But just slight differences.
Right.
They tried to do it as much as possible the same, but there are slight differences and they can tell which ones win.
Right, because our hands are not Xerox machines.
Right, and our minds weren't designed to work that way either.
Right, yeah, that's fascinating.
Sorry to get into that stuff, but I can go on forever about textual criticism and transmission of the text of the New Testament.
My
it's
favorite
fascinating.
dividing line episodes, other than when the theme for Radio Free Geneva comes on, of course, are when you pull up all of the textual variants. I just nerd out on that stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Especially because normally when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm soldering. And so it's mindless. I need something to occupy my brain.
Right.
And so, using the exhaust fan to keep out the fumes from inhaling that and ruining my brain.
That's right.
And when you start going into the textual variants, it's like, oh yeah, let's do more.
I know
of that.
what solder smells like. My dad earned his first-class radio telephone certificate by self-studying, became chief engineer of a television radio station, WHP, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And he designed the sound system for Bible Baptist Church in Sharmanstown. When I say designed it, he didn't go to there weren't any websites back then or catalogs and buy stuff.
Yeah.
He designed the circuit boards. He designed
the circuit boards.
He designed everything in that soundboard that he created. He did the woodworking. He did the metalworking. He did all the soldering.
Goodness.
He designed all of it himself.
That's incredible.
My dad was an amazing fellow.
And now you just go to Sweetwater, tell them what you want.
And it's
digital.
And it's made someplace else. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I mean, just like this thing, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All ready to go. So, okay, back to the Twitter things. That was a fun aside.
Yes.
So a thing that's been less fun really has been just the glowing-eyed people.
Yeah, the red avatar, blue eyes.
All right,
yes.
so might I posit, I'm trying to get this term a little traction that I think would give them a taste of their own medicine. I want to call them the glowing-eyed anonymous yahoos, or the gays.
Oh, glowing-eyed anonymous. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
they wouldn't want that.
Since they call everything that, right?
Right, so, it's gay, yeah.
Everything's fake, everything's gay, whatever. But there's been this kind of historical deconstructionism from the right wing almost, with so many things, Holocaust denialism, all that kind of stuff. But you've also had a push to laud the Crusades at the same time. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's coming from the exact same place. Maybe it is.
There seems to be a relationship. I think that some people would definitely, push away from the Jew hatred, the ethnic type stuff, even though sadly, as I have dialogued with people on the issue of the Crusades, I'm a professor of church history, so it's not the first time I've addressed the Crusades, but as I've dialogued with them, one of the things that has been just heartbreaking for me is there has been a tremendous amount of anti-Muslim sentiment expressed there.
Not even so much anti-Islam, which you kind of have to be as a Christian, but anti-Muslim, the people.
Exactly, and you have to be able to differentiate between those things. I've until recently, for a while, the majority of my debates, the group that I debated the most were Roman Catholics, and then for a while it became Muslims.
Right.
I was going to South Africa. I was going to England, London, Birmingham. I've debated a number of different Scotland, places like that.
I actually met you. I guarantee you don't remember this, but
I don't remember what I had for lunch, so it's pretty good.
So G3, I exhibited. It was probably 2017 or 18, and you did a pre-conference debate
with Adnan Rashid.
Yes. And so I very briefly met you then. I had a lip ring and an emo swoop at the time and no beard.
Okay.
So
I don't remember.
You probably blocked that from your memory, honestly. Even though the most popular hashtag in our podcast Facebook group is "Bring Back the Lip Ring," and that was my wife's fault.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Okay, we won't get into marital counseling right now.
Anyway, we were saying.
Yes. Well, but my concern really, I have seen Muslims come to know Christ. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
It very frequently means no more family. In some lands, it means no more life. And so to have seen that, and then to see so many even Reformed Christians show absolutely no concern whatsoever about presenting the gospel to Muslims, but instead they're talking about hacking up the infidel and and the Crusades didn't go far enough,
Right.
and things like this. Look, I understand that there was warfare and Islam invaded Christian lands. Of course, saying that Islam, invaded and took Jerusalem, yeah, that was 400 years
Sure.
before. I mean, that'd be like the Indians rising up and kicking us all out of our churches because we're on Indian land.
Right.
Because, 200 yeyears ago, something happened. Well, this was, 400 years had passed before all this stuff started happening.
You might be convincing me. Oh, here we go.
Well, but the point is, at the time of the beginning of the Crusades, there was no imminent threat to Europe.
Right.
Now there were Muslims obviously in Spain, and you had the Reconquista taking place after that, but Islam was divided at that time.
Right.
It was divided against itself. That's one of the reasons the First Crusade actually succeeded, where much larger crusades failed afterwards, because once they came in, that was one of the main things that helped to unite Islam.
Right.
And then when one of the Crusades sacked Constantinople, it helped to weaken the one bulwark against Islam. So I mean, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff to put here. For me, this is the issue. The First Crusade was called by a pope who I don't think it was his intention initially to go as far as he ended up going, but basically promised salvation to anyone who died in the course of the crusade.
Right.
If you would take it, and this really bothers me. If you would take up the cross,
you effectively Christianize the Islamic
concept
doctrine of jihad. Yeah.
Yes, it very, very similar parallels there. Different theology underlying it, but yes. And the problem is, it just kills me to hear people say taking up the cross. That's not what the New Testament means by taking up the cross. It's not painting a cross on your armor and you're going to go slice people's heads off. Taking up the cross is denying yourself. Taking up the cross is holiness. Taking up the cross is trusting in the finished work of Christ. So the whole idea of taking up the cross in that sense took on a completely political idea based upon the idea of Christendom.
Right.
Now, you're going to find all sorts of people, even in this place, that are going to have different views of what Christendom could or could not mean. I'm a Baptist, and I actually have a shirt in my RV right now that someone made for me a couple months ago. I was speaking in Louisiana, and I was talking about church history, and the shirt says, "Baptists, everyone killed us, but we didn't kill anyone else." Because and they made it for me. They heard one night, the next night they had it for me. And it's nice and comfy, so I've kept it. And I appreciate the people who did that. But the point is very true. Baptists have believed in religious freedom. We don't believe that the state has the right to force religion upon people. And the idea of Christendom, I believe, I'm a postmillennialist, so I believe that the postmillennial hope is that the Spirit of God works in such a way as to draw the nations to God's law and to Christ, and that means massive regeneration.
Right.
Okay. But there are people today that are promoting a Christian nationalism and a Christendom where they say you don't have to have that. You don't have to have regeneration.
Right.
All you need are Christian princes.
You get the guy, and then he'll make it right.
Right. It's sort of from top down instead of a real change in people's hearts. That really concerns me because I've seen what happened. I know lots of Baptist martyrs who died under Calvinist rule.
Right.
And so people who believe what I believe on salvation and everything else, but because they disagreed on the proper subject of baptism, they were burned at the stake.
Right.
And that's what Christendom does. And it doesn't have to be Roman Catholic Christendom.
Sure.
So I have a real issue as to where we're going to go with this term Christendom. But I do think that when we look back at the Crusades, sending offensive armies into lands that had been taken 400 years earlier, and engaging in just, look, both sides did atrocious things. And every book you read on it will try to excuse one side or both sides or whatever. But the reality is there were horrible things that took place. And the name of Christ was associated with war crimes.
Right.
And did the Muslims do terrible things too? They certainly did. Do Muslims persecute Christians? Of course they do. But that's not an excuse for us.
Right.
Okay. You can't say we're both on the same level at that point.
Want to start reading the Puritans but don't know where to begin? Puritan Treasures for Today from Reformation Heritage Books makes the riches of these godly writers of old accessible for the modern reader. With updated language and helpful introductions, these classic works from John Owen, Jeremiah Burroughs, and more are the perfect starting point for the curious reader. Learn more about the Puritan Treasures for Today at heritagebooks.org/Puritan Treasures and use coupon code WEDoxology at checkout and save 10% off your order. That's heritagebooks.org/Puritan Treasures, coupon code WEDoxology, all one word. There's like this allergy among some of these people to any hint of Christian suffering.
Right.
I talked to, I recorded with Doug Wilson at this conference last year and asked him, all right, postmillennialism, where's the place for suffering? And part of the answer was, well, you still die. and people have to grieve your loss and that kind of thing. And in kind of in that vein, I've been, back to the tattoo conversation is I'm working on a church history meets Hebrews 11 sleeve. And so we've got Alfred and Boniface that are done so far. And so, yes, you've got the establishment of justice and you've got, conversions, but this is going to be Latimer and Ridley.
Right.
And that's going to be the biggest piece.
Right.
That some were sawn in two.
Right.
And so all of that's winning.
Right.
We don't
different kind of winning.
But we want militaristic wins because it looks nice.
Well, and right now, one of the arguments being made is, well, young men need examples, and so we need to give them Richard the Lionheart and things like that. And I go, okay, Richard was a tremendous king and all the rest of that stuff. Still, the theology that he was operating on is horrifically sub-biblical. If you're reformed in any way, shape, or form,
right?
It's horrifically sub-biblical. But why not point people to someone like Adoniram Judson? I mean, there's suffering to win.
Right.
I mean, the things that he went through, the wives that died, the vast majority of his children died, the vast majority of his friends died in ocean accidents and diseases, and he was imprisoned and tortured, and oh my goodness. And it's like, no, we can't present him, even though he was faithful to the end.
Right.
He translated the language of the people so that they could have the Bible in their language. It's still the only Bible they have to this day. Here is an example of a life well lived, and the things he went through, the loss of his children, things like that. He said, I could never have endured these things if I did not believe in God's absolute sovereignty, that he was working these things out for his glory and my best.
Right.
So why not point to someone like that?
Yeah.
I mean, well, because it's a whole lot more exciting to have somebody who can swing a massive sword and cut somebody in half with one shot. Could Adoniram Judson do that? and that's where I just go, well, there's the problem.
You can't have Mel Gibson screaming freedom with Adoniram Judson, right?
Exactly. That is the issue. And what's going to have the longest lasting impact is the question.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Oh, so you're thinking post-millennially and thinking for the
building
long term?
something. I don't think you build post-millennially with something to where fundamentally you're having to what you have to do is you have to move the gospel out of the picture and say that's not the issue. These were great guys and they used the name of Jesus. Well, then why don't you lionize Saladin? The Muslim, I mean, he was a tremendous commander and he, did all sorts of things and a great warrior and all the rest of it. If the gospel doesn't matter, why not? He's really manly.
Right.
But they won't do that. They don't want to do that because of the stigma of Islam. But what that means is the gospel should be relevant to whether we're going to be looking at this. I mean, there was so much in the Crusades, when in the first crusade, when they took Antioch and then they're now being sieged in Antioch and they allegedly dig up the head of the lance that was used in the crucifixion that went into Christ's side.
Right.
And because they became convinced they would go flying out of Antioch and drive the Muslims away. See, but within 6 months, they decided that wasn't what it was, and they became disappointed. And then they found the true cross, and it's a fragment of the true cross. And they're literally, later Crusades are having to negotiate with Saladin and other Muslim leaders to get back the true cross. And they're making compromises just to get back the true cross.
Right.
Well, it wasn't the true cross, for crying out loud, and it was a relic. And when they sacked Constantinople, for example, they stole all these relics and brought them over to Europe, and so they're running around Europe now. And I'm sorry, it's idolatry. It's not
totally agree.
biblical Christianity. And so that was an inevitable and undeniable part of the Crusader mentality as well, that people forget about and ignore.
You brought up pushing the gospel to the side. Do you think some of this may be a reaction to like the evangeli reduction or truncation of the gospel down to Jesus has a wonderful plan for your life, pray this prayer and you'll go to heaven when you die?
Yeah, but Reformed guys have already rejected all that.
Right.
That shouldn't be something that they're even really concerned or thinking about. It just seems to me like it's we've been lied to, we're angry, and we want to lionize angry people with swords. We think that your generation, screwed it all up because you were all too nice or something like that. And what's really weird is when I started getting attacked by the red avatar blue-eyed guys, you know what else I found when I start doing a deep dive down the comment threads?
Do tell.
Flat earthism.
I have seen that, yes.
Flat earthism. Yes. There are more and more people that are buying into it. And if that doesn't tell you this isn't just an overall, I want something completely different, I am not satisfied with what is handed to me by the generations before me. And the problem is you then go, and do you know that this is going to last?
Right.
Do you know, is this something you can pass on?
It's like a wholesale right-wing deconstructionism.
It is.
But the danger of it being mixed with Christianity, like there's no honoring of previous generations at all, it seems.
Well, there's an honoring of the quote unquote Crusades, but the problem is that requires you to abandon your theology, and I would expect if you do that, you're not going to remain Reformed very long, because you can't look at the Crusades and go, that was Reformed Christianity. No, it wasn't.
Right.
No, it wasn't.
Right.
Well, but the Reformers were sacralists, and they did, well, that's true, but they eventually abandoned those things because they realized that was a human tradition that had become predominant in the Middle Ages, but they couldn't substantiate any longer.
You may be winning me over. I have a little bit of a dog in this fight, because I went to North Greenville University, Southern Baptist School in South Carolina, and their mascot was the Crusaders until April, and they changed it this year to the Trailblazers. Trailblazers
okay, Crusader obviously does mean one who takes up the cross.
Right.
So, and that ended up taking on meaning that Christianity never intended that to have.
Sure.
But yeah, okay, I understand the term got transmuted over time. But
and there were some internal things. We'll just leave it at that. There were some internal things that happened at the school that kind of led to them not wanting to associate with that anymore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, I at least had a 5-month head start on these guys and thinking about this. Of course, you've been thinking about it for decades, which is why I want to ask people who've been thinking about it for longer. Right. So,
did you know that your Apple Watch is transcribing everything we're saying? I'm wondering if that may be the longest text message you will ever see. Will be 28 minutes and 21 seconds of a webcast. Someone's gonna get a really long text message.
So
I just happened to look over here and I'm like, I think I know what it's doing. It's transcribing this thing.
Well, we'll find out.
Okay, all right.
We'll find out as soon as we hit stop. So, where can people find you if they don't know you yet?
In my RV.
In your RV.
Ever seen the movie RV? There you go. I just haven't had the huge explosions out of my RV yet that he had in that one. So no. aomin.org, of course, is our website. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm one of the pastors at Apologia Church, and I'll be heading back there next week, and I'll only be there 2.5 weeks, and then I go back out.
Right back out on the road.
Back out on the road. We'll see what happens next year. I honestly have been struggling to schedule stuff for 2025 because I don't know how functional this nation's going to be.
Right. Who's going to lose their minds?
Who's going to lose their minds? And will it take 2 weeks to decide it? And that will cause civil war. And I mean, I'm not making stuff up here. This is not conspiracy theory stuff. This is a lot of people are worried about it.
A lot of people are really freaked out right now.
Yeah. And you know, God's still in control, but we may be living in some really difficult times.
Of course. So, aomen.org and
The Dividing Line.
YouTube, The Dividing
we try
Line.
to do it at least twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week. It all depends. I have a 2-camera 4K studio in the back of my RV, and that's how we do it.
Yes, sir.
You know, so I'm a little geeky along those lines as well. I ran sound at a Southern Baptist church that had 20,000 members, and was a radio announcer. I had my 3rd class radio telephone certificate, still do.
Yeah, radio was my initial major, and then I realized that I can't multitask and talk at the same time. I can multitask and I can talk, but I can't do both. You have to do both if you're going to do any kind of radio.
That's true.
So I gave that up and went to journalism instead. And
Gotcha.
Here we are. Here we are building guitar pedals because
that is a very interesting direction to go.
There's no money in journalism
and
anymore.
I want to tell you about Australian lidocaine. If you get your lidocaine from Australia, it's 10% instead of 5%.
Oh, okay.
So when you use it on that underside of your arm there for the next panel, it lasts a good bit longer. Before you start going.
Painlesstattoo.com is where I've gotten some numbing cream for especially that because you know this stuff is whatever, but you know the underside's
the worst part's the ankle. I'll tell you that right now.
Really,
I almost tapped out. It was torture. It was torture. Arms, not really. Have never been all that bad for me, but ankles about killed me.
My dad just got his first one last year.
Oh my!
He got a bicycle chain around his leg with the golden chain.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Alternating above and below in Greek, and so that was fun to go with him to see him do that, and where you know the artist was like, if it gets too spicy, just tell me to back off. And
there's not much you can do about it.
She said it more colorfully than that, of course.
Oh, yes. Well, at least I'm now working with Christian artists. My first art was not with Christian artists. So it could get quite spicy. But now I've found Christian artists to work with.
I did work with a Christian artist for a while, and then I posted something about Matthew 24 having already been fulfilled and not being about the rapture, and he lost his mind and ended up calling my wife Satan over it. So
you're kidding. That's so sad.
Yeah, it was. He was a
lot
really
of people
good
don't have any
too.
idea of the history of eschatology at all.
No, that's a, as Mark Dewey likes to say, that's a conversation for another day. So I've kept you for 32 minutes, and I know you have places to be.
Well, there's some other folks that actually want to talk to me too.
Exactly. So let's let them get to that. Dr. White, thank you.
Thank you
for
thank you very much
coming on.
All right. God bless.
Go love God, love your neighbor, make some music. We'll see you next time.